In South Africa, the Constitution guarantees the right to basic education for all children. This is regardless of that child's immigration status. Problem is, some undocumented children continue to face barriers to access in public schools. They are denied a spot in the classroom because their parents cannot provide the proper documentation for their existence in the Rainbow Nation. Many of the migrants are from neighboring countries like Mozambique, Malawi, Congo, Zimbabwe, and Lesotho. Public schools have explained their decisions with the 2002 Immigration Act, which prohibits school enrollment for undocumented migrants. However, in 2019, a high court ruling entrenched the rights of children in South Africa, documented or not, to basic education. But with the expiration of the exemption permit for Zimbabweans, many children have found themselves struggling to stay in school. So why are we here today? My name is Keminni Amanor, and you're welcome to The Square. Joining our gathering are Steve Mabona, spokesperson of the Gauteng Department of Education, Johannesburg, South Africa. Also joining us from the same country is Anthony Kaziboni, head of research at the Institute for the Future of Knowledge, the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us on the program. I'll start with you, Steve. What would you say the situation with enrollment for foreign students are now, or is now in Gauteng?
Thanks very much. I don't understand the assertion that learners with or without documents are not allowed to be enrolled in our schools. We've been registering all children, whether they have documentation or not. The only thing that happens when you reach grade 12, you will not be in a position to be resulted if you don't have a document. But you will be allowed to write the examination. The only challenge, it will be lack of resulting, because when you result, you need to know who you're resulting, because you will then need that document as a form of an identity, which will then be confirming that this is so and so that we are resulting.
So, Steve, are you telling us that the Gauteng Education Department is allowing students at the basic level, whether or not you have your documents to enroll in this period, in the open enrollment period?
My challenge, you keep on cutting, but we can confirm that no learner will then be discriminated against because they don't have a document. So let's start there. It can't be that you will not be allowed to be in our school. All of them are allowed. The only challenge that I've already indicated, if you are in a system up until you reach grade 12, you will be allowed to write, but the challenge, you will not be resulted because that result must be linked to a form of a documentation, an identity, which will then be assisting you with the process of being resulted.
I'm going to come back to you, but I'll move on to Anthony now. Anthony, you hear Steve tell us that that is not the case. It's only for those who are grade 12s who may not be allowed, may not get the results that they have to get. What do you think about what you're hearing now as compared to what reports have suggested over the last few days?
Thank you for having me, Keminni. Education is very, very important, and South Africa as a country has enormous respect and understands the importance of people's socioeconomic rights. And as you've outrightly indicated at the beginning of your conversation, the right of access to education is guaranteed for all. Yes, people are registering, foreign students are registering, and issues around discrimination needs to be understood within a broader context of the socio-political climate. It's not allowed to not register a student because of documentation, as Steve has indicated. However, there are political misfits who are coming out and making utterances to the effect that, if you are a student, foreign-born, who are particularly undocumented, and you are occupying a seat in a South African classroom, and there are South Africans who do not have space, you need to vacate. This has been said by some commentators who, again, have repeatedly made remarks such as, if there is a foreigner who's dying and there's a local who's dying and both need a ventilator, I will switch off the foreigner in order to save a local. This is particularly the Patriotic Alliance leader, Mr. Gauteng Mackenzie, who made that remark last year. And before that, he also made another remark that there were more than 10 million undocumented immigrants in the country. So there is a disjuncture between what some political commentators are saying and what the rule of law says. We will conform to the rule of law, and as Steve has alluded to, students are being registered. What's also sensitive around this issue is a growing concern, which is vigilante groups that are taking such rhetorics and running with them, and somewhat heightened tension within the schools, creating an impression that the crisis in basic education, particularly the number of schools, the quality of education, facilities, is because of a belief that public schools are burdened by immigrants. And unfortunately, in this case, you have undocumented children bearing the brunt of what it is.
And one of those vigilante groups, Operation Dudula, the last few days said it was going to picket schools in the Gauteng province. And Steve, I'm coming to you with this. Did you hear about this? Did you engage Operation Dudula in any way, given that you say that you are already enrolling these students? Operation Dudula says, we will not let you enroll the students over South African children. Well, I think we lost Steve there, but perhaps I'll take that question to Anthony now. Anthony, like you rightly said, some vigilante groups have already gone home with the assertion that foreign students are not being enrolled in this open period. One of such groups, like I said earlier, Operation Dudula, said it was going to picket at public schools in the Gauteng province to make sure that foreign students are not given priority over local South African children. What do you make of this? Because essentially then it goes contrary to what Steve has just told us today.
So the contradiction is also legalistic, because whilst the Constitution outrightly indicates that access to education is for everyone, the South African Schools Act as well, 1996, also alludes to this, that parents must ensure that children within their care of from the age of 7 to 15 or until they reach grade 9 should be in class. However, the Immigration Act in itself prohibits learning institutions from registering undocumented children. So these are children in the country, who are irregular, as the Immigration Act again refers to them as illegal foreigners. So school principals, may incur hefty fines if they do admit such students. And when you see the kind of rhetorics that Mr. Gauteng Mackenzie alluded to, we need to have these foreigners out of class, or else we will come there. He primarily rests on the Immigration Act. So here you see a disjuncture between the Immigration Act of 2002 and the two clauses that were removed, that were declared inconstitutional, from the Makanda case of 2019, where documents such as the birth certificate as well as the permit were nullified or disqualified from the registration and admission of schools of learners in South Africa. So it is indeed a complex case, and you will find the vigilante elements, hopping onto the bandwagon and running with this. What we do, understand and validate is that in response to these issues around the exclusion of the ejection of undocumented children, the Department of Home Affairs did release a note indicating that they stand by the Makanda case and no children, documented or not, will be ejected from class. So as it is, Operation Dudula or any vigilante groups do not have a leg to stand on. And we then entrust the police to act swiftly if such unconstitutional and illegal actions happen.
I'll come back to you and find out if this is happening all across the country. But Steve, we were talking earlier about Operation Dudula. Did the activities of public schools affect the education in any way? Did it affect the system of enrollment in any way? Did we lose Steve again? I think we lost Steve again, unfortunately. But Anthony, is this open enrollment, as Steve has told us, in Gauteng province, do you see it as the same all around the country, or there are places where undocumented children are discriminated against and excluded from the enrollment process?
I'll just touch briefly on the Dudula issue that you raised. There were protests last year around October where Dudula was going to schools and again ejecting teachers this time around. And, then their focus was on teachers. As it is this year, I'm not aware of any incidents where Operation Dudula has gone to schools and asked school authorities to eject or not register foreign-born students. Regarding the hotspots, if there are any sentiments, it would be, and your marginalized communities that are experiencing what commentators have referred to as the triple challenge. In South Africa, there's extreme levels of poverty, there's inequality. South Africa has the highest Gini coefficient, which is more than 6.5, indicating that it's one of the most unequal countries, it is actually the most unequal country in the world. And Johannesburg, as a city where I'm talking from right now, is the most unequal city in the world. And there are also very high levels of unemployment. And this cocktail mix plus corruption and poor governance, migrants are generally they've generally been scapegoated as to be the main cause of problems in communities. So you will find that communities that have limited schooling facilities and limited schools, there will likely be more tension there.
I see Steve is back with us. And so Steve, I'll come to you. What would you say are the processes or procedures that children have to go through to be enrolled at any public school in South Africa?
Well, it depends. It depends on the grade that you are looking for. Everyone applies online when coming to grade 1 and 8. And all other grades are required to go to schools and seek space there, failing which then
I think we lost Steve again, but when we get him back, he would take us through the procedure, and then we'll talk about some of the... Steve, are you back? Well, I do not believe so. We'll later talk about some of the challenges of enrollment this year, but I come back to you, Anthony. Why do you think enrollment has become discrimination during enrollment has become an issue this year too?
So I alluded to the triple challenge, and what I've noted from research work I've done on immigration in the country, and particularly xenophobia, there is scapegoating that happens. So scapegoating is when people explain misfortune using other people. So in this case, social ills and social problems are generally attributed to immigrants. So in South Africa, it's generally believed that immigrants are responsible for crime. It's believed that, the country is flooded with immigrants, failing public services such as healthcare, education, housing. Immigrants are also scapegoated and blamed for that. But if you really, really look at the finer problems around basic education, you will see that it's more systemic, and there is a very big problem around corruption. The country loses about 1.5 billion euros annually to corruption, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Gauteng Department of Education itself spent more than 20 million euros on decontaminating schools that had been exposed to the COVID-19 virus, and this, was noted to be, an over expenditure, and it was just too much. And these tenders were awarded irregularly. You will also realize that this corruption it's there in the basic schools. Corruption Watch, an organization in the country, an NPO that looks at anti-corruption research, did a study last year, and they published a report in which they noted that misappropriation of resources was close to 50%. Of the cases reported, there's maladministration and there's an abuse of authority. So there are systemic problems in the education sector, and these need to be dealt with swiftly in order for the constitutional rights of all who are there in the country to be realized. And unfortunately, if we are contending with such situations and with such problems, the migrant, and in this case, the one without papers, is the one who will be left exposed.
We'll come back to those the systemic problems, as you put it. But I want us to talk about enrollment challenges that continue to perpetuate the false perception that foreigners may be receiving priority or taking over, the spots for South African children. What are some of those enrollment challenges that, perpetuates this kind of thinking?
Well, as indicated, the school admission policy, for grade 1s and grade 8s requires access to internet. And some of these things can be difficult. They are actually difficult for a number of people. And in a space where resources are limited, it becomes a first come, first serve. And by the time, some parents want to enroll their children, it may turn out that those spaces have already been occupied. And by that juncture, then, it becomes an issue of your child is occupying my space. And if there is somebody who can trigger, who can use that to emotionally manipulate people, then it will happen. And it's in this case, this conversation is largely stemming from the remarks that were made by the politician whom I mentioned earlier, that there is a crisis and people to blame are actually immigrants, whereas that's not the reality. That's not the reality.
I see. Now, when you have cases, for instance, in the Gauteng province, there are reports that there are still about 1,000 children, no mention of their status, who have not been enrolled yet. So there is a backlog. Such occurrences would definitely fire up perceptions like, you have just indicated. What can the education department do, or the basic education department do, in order to minimize some of these backlogs?
They need to be honest and frank and implement systems that work. So the kind of challenges we're having here are resource-based challenges. It's, the building of new schools, planning around it. It's ensuring that there's enough infrastructure and there's enough learning equipment. And another challenge that is there is the availability of teachers. So once these issues are dealt with from a national level and the budget is used appropriately, then we can arrive at a situation where there is basic, access to education for all.
I want us to talk about whether or not, have you made any research, or do you even know remotely why some parents are not able to document themselves and the children they have or bring to South Africa?
According to UNICEF, there are about at least 640,000 migrant or displaced children in the country, and South Africa has the most child immigrant population on the continent. And these children are from, as you've alluded to earlier, neighboring countries such as Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and Mozambique. These are children. So some of them come here without adults, and some of them, come here without any form of documents. And placing a responsibility for a child to get identity documents is extremely difficult. If you also reflect on the time that we are in, it's immediately post-COVID. South Africa, like any other country, was heavily affected by the COVID pandemic. This also had implications around the operations of the Department of Home Affairs, where documents are processed. VFS Global, the entity that mediates the visa application process here in the country. And there's also a contentious issue around the Zimbabwe extension permit holders that are not going to be renewed. So you'll find that, on the latter issue, the ZEP permit, there are about 178,000 Zimbabweans who are not going to have their documents renewed June this year. And, against where we're coming from, there have been also delays and backlogs on visas that we're applying for. This doesn't only affect regular migrants. There are refugees and asylum seeker backlogs as well. Over 130,000 people are still waiting for their asylum seeker appeals to be finalized. All of these are people without valid documents in essence, despite the fact that the Department of Home Affairs would issue out notices to the effect of extensions. So there are problems. When you also think about what it means for one to get documents. If a baby is born in the country to non-South Africans, the parents will not receive a birth certificate, and they receive only a note from the Department of Home Affairs that indicates the baby's birth date, the details of the parents, and the place of birth. And if the immigrants are unable to pay a birthing fee, as I've found out in some instances, that note is withheld, and the child is without papers. So it's a really, really complicated issue regarding the accessing and getting of permits. And if these are refugees that are coming from war-torn regions, in Central Africa, where do they get the documents?
Anthony, with regards to the undocumented children, there are parents who have indicated that the online system makes it difficult for them to register because then they ask for certain things that they cannot produce, like the birth certification that you mentioned. Shouldn't there be a way around this? What do you know is that way around the problem?
So the general online systems upload this and click and you go on to the next tab. And some of them won't allow you to proceed to the next tab until the earlier documents have been filled. I unfortunately haven't used the system, and Steve would be better placed to respond to that. Online also requires that somebody has access to a computer, they be learned enough. So the question now is, people who are economic migrants, people who are escaping war, are they techno-savvy? Are they coming from English-speaking countries? Do they have knowledge on how to access the internet and upload those documents? So it is a challenge. It is a challenge for, if it's difficult enough for ordinary South Africans, what about disadvantaged migrants who are escaping conflict and war, poverty and hunger?
And so here's my question. Maybe I'll put it in a clearer form. If the Ministry of Basic Education is serious about its position that it stands by the court ruling from 2 years ago, shouldn't it then provide a way for these local departments to be able to enroll these children more easily online?
The systems that are in place should be informed by the admission policy. And based on the Makanda court case ruling, access to a birth certificate and access to a permit do not disqualify the admission and registration of a learner. And if the system is designed in such a way to complicate an application process because of that, then there is a problem with the system, then the system must be changed. It is clear, and basic education is aware and has indicated that the Makanda court ruling holds, and no exclusion should be done.
Very well. Let's try Steve again. Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Wonderful. So we've been talking about the online system and the problems some parents of migrant children have said it poses to them because they don't have certain documentations. They kind of move on to the next stage of the process. How has the Gauteng department gone around this problem?
No, there's no problem with enrollment. We opened the system for everyone to access, and that's how we've been managing it. That's only through what grade 1 okay. Everyone applied online, and that's how we've been managing it. Everyone applied online, and then we then moved to the placement process where we placed everyone who applied in the system. So to a certain extent, that we are left now with less than 500 of those that would have applied online that we are trying to place.
I see. So what kind of documentation that must people produce before they are able to apply online?
I could not hear that.
What kind of documentation is required to be able to enroll a child?
No, when you apply, we need, you see, in terms of documents, you will then be required to upload them online. But safe to say that if you could not upload online, you will then be required to send them to the school, and that's how it works. So, but when coming to the placement, we'll look at all that and check if you did not submit the required document. It depends on what document have you not submitted. The most critical one is the proof of address. If you don't have a proof of address, it becomes difficult because you don't know where you stay. But if we have that, then the rest should not be a problem with the place.
I see. So how many migrant children would you say that your department has enrolled this open period? Are you able to tell us?
No, I don't have that.
I see.
Because we don't segregate foreigners from the South Africans. We look at learners because all of them must be in a school. So we don't make a concerted effort to segregate and say these ones are foreigners, these ones are locals. Don't do that.
So it would be safe to say that you wouldn't know how many will be writing their matric without the necessary ID number that they need to have.
No, I would not have that stat offhand. But yes, I know that we do have those that would have been allowed to write. But what happens, like as I've indicated to you, if you don't have a document, you will not be resulted. Because when they result against identification. Who are you? Who are we resulting? So that's the challenge with those that are not documented.
For the sake of our international community, when you say that a student will not be resulted, what does that mean?
it means you don't get results. That's as simple as that.
What good will that do a child if they finish school and they can't get a result?
Come again?
I'm asking that in our climate, in Africa, and even in South Africa, what good will that do a child who can graduate without a result?
No, how are you going to graduate? Because you might not, you're not going to be going to higher education without a document, or without results. So how are you going to go up without results?
That's what I'm asking. How does that help the child? You admit the child, they go through the process. For some reason, they stay undocumented. But when they get to the point where they need their results to further their education, they don't have it. My question is, has the department given a thought to this and you know, how this could impact the child?
No, but there are policies that guide the process. So the policy is crafted at the national level, and unfortunately, I'm in the province. If you understand that, because this is, I represent Gauteng, not the basic education. So that question is a relevant one, but at the wrong person, because we are not responsible for policy making. Because I hear your question is more policy oriented. That it doesn't affect the child because education, not in the implement.
Very well. I want to talk quickly about the backlog. Now you say there are only about 500. When do you expect to place those 500 children?
We give ourselves up until the end of this month to finalize this process.
That will be about 2 or 3 weeks of lost classroom time for those children. Is there any plans to make sure that they get all that lost time back?
Yes.
Plan?
Yes, we will do catch-up plans. As we normally do every year. We do catch-up plans and make sure that those that might have lost anything, then we then provide that process.
Very well, that sounds good. But talk to us about why there is a backlog in the first place. What are the challenges?
The challenges are capacity, space. There's a lot of people that we need to accommodate, and the schools are lesser, the classes are lesser, and we try by all means to accommodate everyone. That's why we find ourselves in here, because we don't turn people back. All those that are of a school-going age, they must be in a classroom, irrespective. So we try to accommodate. And there are areas where we are highly pressured, because there's many people, development is moving ahead, and that's why we find ourselves in here.
Would you say that the province or your country needs more schools, more public schools perhaps?
Indeed, we need more classrooms, we need more schools, especially in the high pressure areas. Not everywhere, because in other areas we don't have pressure. We can accommodate everyone that applies, but there are certain areas where you have quite a number of people that is there which need to be accommodated.
Steve, we'll leave it here for now. We'll talk to Anthony for a bit just before we close the show. Thank you so much for your time, Steve. And I apologize for the situation with the connection. Steve Mabona is spokesperson for the Gauteng Department of Education in Johannesburg, South Africa. Still from South Africa is Anthony Kaziboni. He's head of research at the Institute for the Future of Knowledge, University of Johannesburg. Anthony, you had my conversation with him, particularly with, the children who go through matric but cannot go beyond that because they don't have verified results. What do you think about that situation?
It's lamentable. It's lamentable. According to the Learner Unit Record Information and Tracking System, the system they use here in South Africa, to collate the number of students. In 2021, there were about 12 million children of South African origin in schools, with close to 500,000 without identity documents. So this issue around identity identities and undocumented children goes beyond the immigrant child. So there are South Africans who are also affected by it. And again, going back to the constitution of the country, it's important that we treat everyone equally. And it is important for the state to start thinking of alternative ways on how they can navigate this space regarding children without identity documents, foreign-born or not, illegal or not, South African or not. Children must be treated as children, and access to basic education is extremely important. And at matric, they do need a certificate so that they can continue with life.
Just last one before we wrap up today. One of the things many South Africans have said about the situation, especially the backlog, is old problems in a new era. If the governments of South Africa at all levels are serious about dealing with the backlog so the students don't lose classroom hours, what would you suggest that they do at this point?
About identifying what the problems are in education. So we know what the problems are. Corruption, poor governance, maladministration. Let's deal with the problems, and let's make sure that every rand goes an extra mile.
Anthony, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your insight on the matter. Anthony Kaziboni is head of research at the Institute for the Future of Knowledge, University of Johannesburg in South Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you.